Starting today, a new AI robot is released that can do exactly what you do. It never gets tired, never asks for a raise, and it's faster, cheaper, and more efficient than you. Your job, gone. The government isn't stepping in to help. It's just the innovation of the market, they say. Your only option is to learn how to build one of these AI robots yourself, which is not so easy. This is the future we're all facing, but this video isn't about AI. It's about us, because this exact scenario has already happened multiple times throughout history. There have been moments where market-driven progress reshaped human societies overnight, leaving people scrambling to adapt. And that's the real issue with market society. Not that markets exist, but that this system prioritizes the needs of the market over the needs of the people. This video is the second part of my series on Karl Polanyi's work, so if you haven't watched the first one yet, I'd highly recommend checking it out. I'll leave the link down below. So, to understand what we're about to explore, we need to meet the man who is our inspiration. So, Polanyi was a Jewish converted Christian guy who lived in Vienna studying law. During the Great War, he served as a cavalry officer from 1914 to 1917, an experience that left him deeply traumatized and disillusioned with capitalism. After the war, he started writing for socialist publications, debated with some of the brightest minds championing free market ideals like Ludwig von Mises, not just about the economy, but also society. And eventually, he moved to the United States, became a professor at Bennington College, and in 1944, he published his masterpiece, The Great Transformation. And that's what we're going to explore in this video. I'll do my best to articulate his arguments, but to be fair, his ideas are far too rich to be fully captured in one YouTube video. So let's get into it. First, let's define what we mean by market economy. It's a system where the economy is made up of many individuals, each trying to maximize their own gain. Every decision they make in the system regulates itself, which creates a decentralized platform where prices naturally settle at an equilibrium. For example, if people start valuing a product higher than its current price, they'll buy more of it. As demand increases, the price rises, and this encourages more production, which eventually balances supply and demand, bringing prices back down. That's the price mechanism, what Adam Smith called the invisible hand. The market system operates entirely through this mechanism and is incredibly efficient at allocating resources. But Polanyi argues this logic has a limit. You see, before the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution, societies were structured completely differently. For example, there were no real estate agencies selling land because people didn't treat land as something to buy and sell. There were no job boards or employment agencies like LinkedIn because people didn't apply for jobs. Wages weren't even a thing. People worked in apprenticeship, guilds, and peasant communities. Markets did exist, but not for everything. In other words, the economy was embedded in society. It was just one part of how people lived, shaped by tradition, culture, and relationship. But then the Industrial Revolution hit, and the very nature of these big machines changed how people work together, how people live together. These big machines were huge investments, incredibly expensive, meaning only wealthy merchants could afford them, people with capital. That's why we call them capitalists. And since those investments needed a long time to generate profit, they required a stable supply of three things: labor, land and resources, and money. So what was the proposed system to make sure all three of these things were provided with stability? You guessed it. Enter them into the market system. So the first land market, a labor market, and finally in the 19th century a global exchange market was created. But this, Polanyi says, is where the market system fails, because the market system would treat these things as commodities. In Polanyi's view, a commodity is something produced for sale, but labor is human effort, land is nature, money is a tool for trade. None of them were produced for sale, and yet capitalism demanded they be treated as if they were. This is firstly morally wrong. I don't think there's a need for explanation there, and also impossible since it undermines the role of the government. This is why Polanyi calls the free market system utopian, and it was never able to fully achieve its goal of a completely self-regulating market society. The effects it imposed on people were unbearable, and there was always a counter-movement pushing back. Take the enclosures in England for an example. When the wool industry became more profitable, landlords began evicting farmers from their ancestral lands to turn fields into pastures for sheep. The land, once a shared community resource, became something to be bought, sold, and fenced off. Those farmers who were evicted now had to sell their labor in order to survive. Many of them didn't, and many protested and rioted against these acts until finally the Tudors and the Stuarts, who were the rulers of England, pushed back. For instance, the Anti-Enclosures Act tried to limit how much land could be taken away from commoners. There were also poor laws, which aimed to support those who were being displaced. These were imperfect solutions, but they slowed down the rate of change, giving people time to adjust instead of throwing into crisis overnight. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, and there was the same dynamic being played out. Factories needed workers, and cities swelled with masses of displaced rural population. Families that had lived off the land for generations were suddenly at the mercy of unstable job markets, slum conditions, and brutal working hours. This time, there were no strong Tudor-style policies to counterbalance the upheaval. Society was moving too fast, and the government didn't step in to slow it down. The social history of the 19th century was shaped by a double movement. As markets expanded across the world, increasing trade and production on an unprecedented scale, society pushed back to limit the market's control over things that weren't true commodities. The counter-movement against market expansion weren't just about stopping change. They were about slowing it down. Many historians dismiss the efforts of the Tudors and the Stuarts, arguing that since markets ultimately prevailed, their policies were meaningless, just a temporary roadblock in the path of progress. But why should the ultimate victory of a trend be taken as proof of the ineffectiveness of their efforts to slow down its progress? Why should the purpose of these measures not be seen precisely in that which they achieve, in the slowing down of the rate of change? And this is the key takeaway here. Many classical economists like Ludwig von Mises, who we've mentioned before, argue that protection efforts, things like minimum wage or unions, actually cause unemployment. Their logic is if workers were willing to work for whatever wage the market offers, then unemployment wouldn't exist. For how could there be unemployment but for the fact that workers are not willing to work at the wages they could get in the labor market for the particular work they were able and willing to perform? And technically, they're right if labor were just another commodity, because commodities don't choose how, where, or at what price they're sold. If demand for oil goes up, its price rises. But labor isn't a commodity. It's people with families, responsibilities, and dignity. All these protection efforts exist to push back against the system that tries to turn labor into just another commodity. So whenever we think about regulations, we have to recognize the trade-off. Yes, some may slow economic progress or limit growth, but many exist for a reason, to ensure that progress doesn't come at a greater cost. But throughout the 19th century, nations became so obsessed with economic development and the promise of free markets that they ignored the social fabric being torn apart. But as the working class grew, it demanded more political power. People without property who had long been excluded from voting began gaining suffrage. The failure of free market policies and the strain between labor and capital gave rise to ideologies like socialism and fascism. The old system collapsed into ideological struggles that shaped the 20th century. So Polanyi sees the issue as not markets and capitalism inherently, but market society, and the fact that market needs and profits were at the heart of society, and everything else is subordinated to them. To finish up, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture here. There's always been a tension between the social sciences, and you can see it in any debate about modern issues. Take our earlier example about AI and automation, for instance. To an economist, AI replacing human means businesses can cut costs, increase efficiency, and boost innovation. Some jobs disappear, new industries emerge, and in the long run, things balance out. But to a political scientist, this isn't just about numbers. It's about people, communities, and stability. If millions lose their jobs overnight, the market's long-term balance doesn't help them in the short term. It's a mistake to take any one side completely in the ongoing debate between economics, politics, and sociology. Tensions among them is inevitable, necessary, and essential to the pursuit of truth.